All right. Good evening. Good evening, everybody. Good evening. Good evening. Thank you very much for joining us today. Hope you're having a wonderful day. Thanks for the likes. We are on 27.8K likes on TikTok, and this is very beautiful. I want to thank everybody who has helped to push the live so far, thus far. Thanks to Bumblebee, Dimeji360, Koboko, Abby71, and many other names that I may not be able to, read out now. But thank you very, very much for your support. This actually does help a lot. The 11 lab as well. Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for part-timing. Please don't stop. Let's try and keep doing that so that way we can get the live stream on the FYP. For those of us on TikTok, please click on the heart icon above my image and kindly join the team. If you're already a member, please drop a heart to me, or drop a gift. These things help to push us to the FYP. For those of us on YouTube and on Facebook, thank you very much for joining us today. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Please like the live and also share so we have other people join us here. If you're on Twitter, thanks for being here. Please like and repost. For those of us on YouTube and Facebook, please like and share. All right. I hope you enjoyed the music. The music, really beautiful, nice mix, if I just say so myself. Okay, today we are going to be revisiting a topic we had not too long ago. And I'm doing that today because tomorrow we're going to be going deeper in this particular conversation. So I felt, let's have this to remind ourselves what we've discussed so far, so that when we come tomorrow, we'll be fresh and we'll just, go into new stuff along the lines of the topic, anyway. So it's history versus revision, understanding the Yorùbá Benin connection. I think one of the things I've noticed, and I've noticed this for a bit, but it's becoming more glaring by the day, it's that people who stock in trade is revisionism and falsehood sometimes just get very, very enraged when they see, folks who are trying to set things straight, set the record straight. And it's quite shameful that that's the path that many people choose. And I'm saying that because my Facebook, timeline filled with all kinds of nonsense, because people just keep writing rubbish instead of, arguing their cases and saying, what, maybe you're wrong here. This is my position. I know I'm not wrong. And the reason I know I'm not wrong is not because I'm above mistakes ever. It's because I wasn't just saying what I thought. I was actually standing on the shoulders of those who have gone ahead. It's actually a very good place to be. It makes things a lot easier. And I think people can't reach the people who wrote those books, so they just throw tantrums in the comment section. I'm hoping that today we're not going to have such what's the word now? Scenario, essentially. People getting angry. There's no need to get angry. We're just going to read books and discuss history. All right. But before we get started, again, if you're on TikTok, thank you very much for power tapping. Thank you so much for your support. But please don't stop. Let's keep power tapping. Let's keep liking the live and sharing as well. If you're on YouTube, please like and repost. And like I always say, if you're on YouTube, TikTok, click òyìnbó ìtò ẹ̀pọ̀ jù bá mi wo bí tó ṣe bí ọkàn àbí ìfẹ́ sí lókè bẹ́ẹ̀. The heart icon, please drop a heart me. Let's try and push to the FYP. And I say this repeatedly because we're not coming on camera and we're going to need all the help that we can get. Before we get deep into this, let me first say this, that regardless of where you're coming from, whether you're the Yoruba person or an Igbo or an Edo Benin person, these conversations are not had in order to rile you up or in order to get you angry or in order to change your history or whatever. All we're doing is we've noticed that you are rewriting Yoruba history. And it's important that we don't let things just fly straight. And the historians or to say this is what Yoruba people think about Benin. That's not what we're doing today. What we're doing really is to ask ourselves, what do Benin say about themselves? Or should I say this way, what did they say about themselves before the revision started? And we're going to stick to what they said. So essentially, we're listening to the elders, the Benin elders, right? We're not trying to make anything up. We're not even telling the Yoruba perspective. We're just focusing on what the Benin elders have always said before the revision started in 1970. And it's quite interesting that we've had historical connections for centuries, and then somebody comes along in 1970 and rewrites the whole thing. But how did all of that happen? That's what we'll be discussing today. So you're going to have a great time. We're having two parts in this series. By the way, the video is already on our YouTube channel, Busui Oris. It's the same title, History versus Revision, Understanding the Yoruba-Benin Connection. But today we're going to listen to the two parts, so it might take us about 2 hours. But I'm sure you're going to have fun. You'll enjoy it, okay? So, having said that, let me read the description and then we can all listen. 1 second, please. All right. The historical bond between the Yoruba people and the Benin monarchy stands as one of the most significant pillars of West African heritage. For generations, the established tradition has remained clear that the Eweka dynasty began with Prince Oromiyan of Ile-Ife. I'll say that again. For generations, the established tradition has remained clear that the Eweka dynasty began when Prince Oromiyan of Ile-Ife arrived in Benin at the invitation of the city's leaders. This royal connection was born out of a period of political instability and formed a lasting bridge between the two of the most powerful civilizations in the region. Understanding this shared lineage is essential for anyone looking to grasp the true depth of our collective history. In recent times, new narratives have emerged to challenge these long-held accounts of our origins. This video takes a deep look at the historical records to examine these revisions for consistency and accuracy. We explore the ancient testimonies of the Benin people themselves and investigate the roles of figures like Obagodo, the Ogisos, and the mysterious Ekaladera. By connecting these pieces of evidence, we can see how the ruling dynasties of Ife and Benin have maintained active links that persist even into the modern era. It is important to ask why these historical narratives are being questioned now, and what that means for our future relationship. Regardless of the political shifts in modern-day Nigeria, the cultural and ancestral ties between these two groups remain a source of strength and identity. We must evaluate every bit of evidence to ensure that the truth about our shared thrones is preserved for the next generation. Join the conversation as we navigate the complex and fascinating story of how the Yoruba and Benin thrones are forever entwined. So here's a video, History versus Revision, Understanding the Yoruba-Benin Connection. Please power tap, like, share as you listen. And if you have any questions, trust me, just drop in the comment section. Trust me, I'm going to attend to it. We'll talk about it after the video. Just don't curse anybody out, right? Just listen and be blessed. Thank you. God bless you. So let's get into the video. History versus Revision, Understanding the Yoruba and Benin Connection. Take a listen. So before we get started at all, we're going to listen to the Oba of Benin, and then from then on we'll go into other things. Okay? This was at his coronation, the present Oba of Benin. Take a listen.
That Oduduwa sent his son Oromiyan at the request of elders of Benin to return with them as ruler of their realm. Oromiyan's stay in Benin may have been short, but before he left, a child was born to him who was later crowned Oba, and as is known today, as Eweka the First. Oromiyan's time in Benin, however short-lived, he was an Oba, and so he was the first Oba after the Ogiso dynasty came to an end. He established Obaship in Benin. By implication, therefore, the listing of past Obas should therefore begin from Oromiya, as it is listed in the Gariwa's book. Short history of Benin, actually making my revered father 39th Oba that reigned in Benin, if the listing is counted from and should be counted from Oromiya. I therefore stand before you today as the 40th Oba of Benin.
All right. So he talked about Oduduwa sending his son Oromiya to Benin. Now, a lot of things have been said in the past many years, and I think that's where the whole question started on Friday. People have asked about the Kaladera. He said in this speech, and I think you should even listen to the full thing, because he said in that speech that the idea of a Kaladera is something that they can keep to themselves, but that I don't want to just say it, so it doesn't look like I'm making things up. Take a listen to this.
By the grace of God Almighty, and in the name of our ancestors, I welcome you all to this auspicious occasion. In particular, I welcome His Excellency, President Muhammadu Buhari, GCF, our head of state, Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Nigeria, here represented by the very, very able Vice President, Professor Sibanjo. You're welcome. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the events of today mark the end of activities prescribed by customs and tradition for my accession to the revered throne of this ancient kingdom. I accept with faith and humility the destiny which ordained that henceforth I shall be the embodiment and expression of the culture, aspirations, and history of our people. As the principal actor in the events of several months that led to this awesome position, I've had a unique opportunity to reflect on the values and essence of our historical continuum, what royalty represents for our people are justice, peace, and unity. The time-tested, rancor-free succession process bequeathed to us in our customs and tradition is a great tribute to the far-sightedness and wisdom of our forefathers and our people. This collective achievement is a veritable proof of our ability to manage our own affairs. It makes us very proud of our heritage. Today, as the 40th Oba of Benin, a direct descendant of Oromiya, the son of Oduduwa, whom the Benin people of that era knew as a Kaladera, their self-exiled prince, who later became ruler in Ile-Ife. The Benin people recognize Oduduwa and his origin, but it is not our place to force this recognition on others outside our boundaries.
That's what I wanted you to hear. The Benin people recognize whatever it is they recognize, but it's not their place to force the recognition outside their boundaries. Why? Because that recognition is not historically factual. the Kaladiran thing that the Oba said, I mean, with all due respect to the Oba, you say, well, that is not the truth of history. Not truth of history, not just according, I'm not saying according to me, I'm saying according to the elders of Benin land. Their own historians, their own history, their own, court chroniclers did not mention that Ogiso was in any way related to Kaladiran. But there's something I appreciate in what the king said. He said it's not their duty to force folks from outside their boundaries to recognize whatever story they are saying, to telling them. But when it comes to the real history of what happened, what we're going to do is we're not going to start with a Yoruba book. We're going to start with something from Benin people themselves. Today, there are many books here. There's a book called, there's a book that the Oba himself referred to earlier, A Short History of Benin by Jacob Egariwa. But there's also Intelligence Report on Benin by H.F. Marshall. And there's one I would like us to read, which actually has to tell us, which has to do with when the change happened, when people began to talk about the fact that there was one Kaladiran somewhere. When, at what point in history did that get introduced, right? And why is it that there is a lot of disagreement about that particular point in the historiography of Benin people? Having said that, let's begin with the Intelligence Report on Benin. This is by H.F. Marshall. I'll read Jacob Egariwa later. Well, I think it's even better to read Egariwa. Why? Because he's the son of the soil, apparently. So let's start with him. Give me a second. Let me find you that book. So this book was published in 1936 by Jacob Egariwa. It says many years ago, Oduduwa of Uhe, in bracket Ile Ife. Why do you do that? Because Benin is called Ife Uhe. And he wrote there in bracket Ile Ife, the father and progenitor of the Yoruba kings, sent his eldest son, Oba Godo, who took the title of Oba with a large retinue all the way from Uhe, to found a kingdom in this part of the world. At the moment of his departure, his father gave him a charm in the form of a snail shell containing some earth to invest him with absolute power and right over the lands that should come under his sway. Hence, the power and right ever since to the present day of every reigning Oba of Benin as the lord and owner of the land. Before we go on, let me just quickly tell you if you notice something. He said that the elder son of Oduduwa, Oba Godo, went to Benin and I took on the title of Oba. In actual fact, it wasn't Oba, it was Ogiso. You will get this from other books, but you understand why. Because there are two separate dynasties. There's the Ogiso dynasty and there's the Oba dynasty. The Oba dynasty, according to what you just heard from the Oba of Benin right now, actually began with Oromio. This was way before Oromio. This was at the beginning of the Ogiso dynasty itself. So this person called Oba Godo, according to Egariwa, is supposed to be the son of Oduduwa. It says the elder son of Oduduwa, Oba Godo, took the title of Oba with a large retinue all the way from Uhe, containing some earth, to invest him with absolute power and right over the lands that should come under his sway. Hence, the power and right ever since to the present day of every reigning Oba of Benin as the lord and owner of the land. The snail shell of earth was afterwards modeled in brass and preserved in the royal palace as a memorial and an evidence of the fact of posterity. The reign of Ogiso, so you see, it's the same book. So you see what he was talking about, essentially. The reign of Ogiso was a long course of misrule, failure, and anxiety. For instance, it used to be said of him, Ogiso Mamiemwe Efiagba. I apologize if I'm not pronouncing it correctly. We are learning it small. Ogiso Mamiemwe Efiagba, meaning Ogiso never convened a meeting except in times of trouble and crisis. Domestic worries added to his weakness. He had numerous wives, but only one bore him a son. The rest therefore complained because they had no children owing to their persistent worry. Ogiso was compelled to send his senior wife Esago alone to consult the oracle for him to know the cause of their barrenness. By the way, this story may sound like, why are we doing this? Why are we not just talking books? Just pay attention. This is a definitive history of Benin. This is the very first one that ever written. That's what I'm reading before reading any other book. Written by Ẹkáàbọ. Was first published in 34 in Edo language and in 36 in Europe, in English language. So this is very, very important. It may sound like story, but it's important. So it says here, the Ogiso. So you see, you said Oba, but now you're saying Ogiso because the idea of Ogiso is actually supposed to be like Oba, but not be the title Oba. But it's saying here that the Ogiso had numerous wives, but only one bore him a son. The rest therefore complained because they had no children. Owing to their persistent worry, Ogiso was compelled to send his senior wife, Esago, alone to consult the oracle for him to know the cause of their barrenness. For the oracle was then believed by all to be the source of divine revelation to people, just as it is still believed by many of the present day. The oracle declared Esago, the senior wife of the Ogiso, to be the cause, and that she must be killed in order that the two wives might have, or that other wives might have issue. Esago concealed the prediction of the oracle, declared his only son, Kaladera, to be the cause, and that his nature and destiny prevented any brothers and sisters being born, and that he must be killed or sacrificed to enable the Ogiso wives to bear children. The first mention of that name, Kaladera, in this book is what I just read right now. Had nothing to do with anybody coming from Oduduwa, because according to this original thing that they said, and I'll tell you where I got this story from. According to this original story from Ẹkáàbọ, Kaladera was the son of Ogiso, not the father of Oromiyan, not Oduduwa. So he's saying Obagodo was the son of Oduduwa. He moved to the Benin area. He became the Ogiso. He did not have children. By the way, Ogiso is actually a title, and later on we're going to break it down whether he's talking about one person or several people that had the same title. And I might as well just say it right now. There were several people that had the title Ogiso. The last Ogiso is the one he's talking about here, and he's the one that had the Kaladera as a son. So let's continue reading. So essentially, that Ogiso had only one son, but had many wives, and wanted to have more children. Sends his wife to go meet with to go consult the oracle. That one gets there, and they were told that the reason why the other wives don't get children be that. It's quite weird, sha. And that she must be killed. The senior wife must be killed in order for the other wives to have issue. But she concealed the prediction of the oracle when she reached home and told her husband that the oracle declared his only son, Kaladera, to be the cause, and that his nature and destiny prevented any brothers and sisters. So the woman lied that the Kaladera was the reason the father was not having children, even though the oracle said the woman should be killed so that others should have kids. So it says here that the Kaladera must be killed or sacrificed to bear children. Esago then headed the women in the harem, and they began to worry the Ogiso daily to kill a Kaladera to make way for them to have children. As a result of their united and persistent efforts, the Ogiso banished a Kaladera with his mother from the city instead of killing him, and he eventually became the founder of Guato or Ugoton on the bank of a river after long wandering in the forest. The day of Kaladera's banishment from the city is still remembered by our people, as it was very cold and there was neither sun nor rain. Any similar day is called Kaladera or Kaladera Day. 3 years after the banishment of Kaladera, Ogiso's wife still remained barren, so he sent 2 men and 2 women to consult the oracle once more through the same diviner. The oracle declared Esago to be the cause of their barrenness, and that she must be killed in order that the rest of the wives of the Ogiso might have issue. I want you to hear the story first. We'll finish. So the oracle declared Esago to be the cause of their barrenness, and that she must be issue. The diviner further stated that he had told the uncle declared the senior wife to be the cause of the barrenness and not Caldera as she reported. The people brought the news home to the Ogiso, who on hearing it became very sorrowful and lamented over the banishment of his son, and instantly ordered Esaro to be executed. After this, Ogiso hastily dispatched messengers to Ogoton, begging his son to return to the city with messengers and overlook the ill treatment he had sustained. But the Caldera complied with the advice of an old woman there and refused to return. Ogiso sent troops repeatedly to bring him by force, but the Caldera dug pits into which the troops fell and perished. Consequently, the elders who had intended to place the Caldera on the throne after the death of his father now gave him up because of the number of soldiers he had killed in the pits. Though Esaro had been killed, the wives of Ogiso had no children. For a considerable number of years after the death of Ogiso, there was an interregnum, and the following leaders of the people, listen to the names: Ere. Kini Ere Yoba. All this I'm saying, I'm going to eventually explain. I just want us to read, okay? What is Ere in Yoruba? For those of us who are listening. I hope you can hear me. So Ere means profit. This other one is Orire. So you have Obagodo, you have Ere, then you have Orire. It's in the book. Oh. I'm not making anything. I'm reading from A Short History of Benin by Jacob Egaiva. It says, for a considerable number of years after the death of Ogiso, there was an interregnum, and the following leaders of the people, Ere, Orire, Akwankwan, Ekpigo, Oria, Emose, Ororo, Obioye, Arigo, Evian, a republican form of government. At that time, the country was known as Igodomi Godo. We'll be reading this. You see, all this while we're having this session, I'll be referring to this book. I didn't used to read it, but this session that we're having, we shall read the book. What is all this strange about? First, to establish the fact that there is no Ekaladera in Ife. Ekaladera never went to Ife, and even if he did, according to the original story, by the way, he did not. There's not like even if he did. The story says he went to Ugoton. That's number one. Number two, he's also not the father of the Ogiso. He's the son of the Ogiso. And the Ogiso himself is the son of Odudua. So there's no way on earth the grandson will be the father of his grandfather, or will be the same person as his grandfather, because now they're saying Ekaladera is the same thing as Odudua. How can it be the same thing as Odudua when you literally just said Odudua gave birth to Obagodo, he took on the title of Ogiso, he then gave birth to Ekaladera, Ekaladera was then banished to Ugoton. How can Ekaladera then become Odudua? Makes no sense. But before we go deep into this, where did he get his story from? This is Jacob Egaiva. Where did he get his story from? He's in the preface. Where were we? We stopped at chapter 1. We're going to come back to chapter 2 later. I want you to read the preface so you understand how he got this thing together. It says, the history was collected from the following authorities: Ihogbe, the worshippers and recorders of the departed Obas; Ogbalaka, the royal bards; Igun Eronwo. By the way, if I'm not pronouncing the name correctly, I assure you I'm not merging it deliberately. I just don't understand how to, because our own language they used to put at me. So this one, as small as they try. Just stay with me, please. I'll take it again. The history was collected from the following authorities: Iogbe, the worshippers and recorders of the departed Obas; Ogbelaka, the royal bards; Igun Eronwo, the royal brass smith; Owen Osa of Akpakpava, one of descendants of the Benin native fathers of the 15th and 16th centuries; Okaeben, Oganwe, Efaz, Yashere, Esama, Ehobamwen, and so on, to whom I owe unbounded thanks. Now it says, I offer my cordial thanks to Messrs. E.J. Egaiva and Yusuf Otokiti for the kind help. Above all, this is where I'm going. Above all, I feel very grateful to His Highness Akenzuwa II, the Oba of Benin, for his unfailing advice and aid by which I was able to complete this work in spite of its many difficulties, and also to late Oba Eweka II, who very kindly attended to me for over 3 hours on March 15, 1930, for the necessary revision of this work, when the original manuscript was read to him by the present Oba, the Edaiken of Uselu. In other words, this was not something that he just conjured. He told you, he listened to, where he got the story from. Then he says that, listen, I was with the Oba for 3 hours, and there was this, the Oba now, Oba Eweka, at the time, he was talking about Oba Akenzuwa, Oba Eweka, and that he was there for 3 hours reading the manuscript, and they were helping him to make the necessary corrections. I said, I'll tell that again. And also to late Oba Eweka II, who very kindly attended to me for over 3 hours on March 15, 1930, for the necessary revision of this work, when the original manuscript was read to him by the present Oba, then Edaiken of Uselu. That present Oba is the father of this Oba. Right? No. He's the father of this Oba's father. The one that wrote, I remain your obedient servant. That one, his father, is the one that is talking about at this time. So, from when he wrote this book, there have been 4 kings. There have been Eweka II. That's the king that was there when he started writing. Then there was Oba Akenzuwa, who became king at the time. Who was one who actually helped to read the script. Then was the one before Oba Eware, who used to work with the Nigerian Civil Service. Erejoa, thank you. Erejoa. Oba Eware is the one that's the king now. So there have been 4 kings since he started working on the book. Of course, he finished the book under those 2 kings. Eweka II. Eweka was named for the original, that's the son of Oromio, Eweka. Eweka II was the king on the throne at the time. Akenzuwa was still the Edaiken of Uselu. Akenzuwa was present when they were reading the manuscript to the Oba of Benin at the time in 1930. Okay. After Akenzuwa, we then have Erejoa. After Erejoa, we now have Oba Eware. I think it's Eware II that's on the throne now. So the point is that between Eweka II and Akenzuwa, they were there when the story was being written. So they made the revision that needed to be made. They knew the story to be correct as of 1930, when everything was done, before it was then published. So this is not about the fact that someone just says, oh, this is a new history. I didn't know where he got it from. No, he got it from folks working in the palace. He got it from the bards. He got it from worshippers. He got it from chroniclers. And he worked with the kings for 3 hours. He was reading the manuscript to them. So this is not something I just made up now. So that's to tell you that whatever you are hearing these days must be the revision that we're talking about. A lot of people are now revising things. And this revision started in 1970. We're going to get to that today. The revision started in 1970 after Oba Akenzuwa. It wasn't Oba Akenzuwa outside the history, because he was there when they were writing this thing. And someone has helped us write in the comment section, Eweka II, Oba Akenzuwa, Oba Erejoa, and then Oba Eware II. So this gives you an idea where the story is coming from. I know, I agree with me, I was just joking. I knew it was a typo. Emeka II. It is well. But I'm sure it was a typo. Anyway, the point I'm trying to make is that everything we read about Ogiso and the history of the Oba was something that the kings of Benin had to attest to, or had to give the assent to, right? They had to give the assent to. So you had the king that was on the throne at the time, Oba Eweka II. Then you had the one that was coming after him, Oba Akenzuwa, and they saw what the person wrote, and they said this makes sense. And in that stuff, what did they tell us? They told us that there was a man who called Obagodo. He left Ife. His father was Oduduwa. He gave him a snail shell and earth I'll explain all of those things eventually with another book. He gave him a snail shell on earth and told him to travel, and anywhere he went will be under his sway, like under his command. He'll become the owner, the lord of the land. And then he travels all the way down to the place we now call the Godomigodo or Benin. And when he got there, he created a dynasty, Ogiso dynasty. And that's why I tell people that the Ogiso that they talk about in Benin was actually started by a Yoruba man. And I'm not saying this again. History is not meant to throw jabs or try to make some people feel bad. We're just discussing what happened. And by the way, this does not in any way make anybody low or less or anything. It's just what I'm reading a book by a Benin man. So this is not about I want to make a point. Well, as far unless the point is the truth, I'm trying to tell you the truth. He then goes there, created his land, started the Ogiso dynasty. The second person who took over from him was Eri. The one who took after Eri, gain, profit, is Orire, good fortune. Those names sound very much like, and then Obagodo himself. Now, I like Jacob Egariva, and I believe he's telling the truth. But is it possible for us to have another report to help us understand exactly what this man is saying? Yes. This time I'm going to take you to a book by H.F. Marshall. This book is called Intelligence Report of Benin. It was published in 1940. By the way, if you want to understand the history of any people, right, I'm not going to say, see what Yoruba people wrote about Benin. I'm going to say, see what Benin people wrote about themselves, at least before the revision started. We're going to trace the revision today as well. So this is called Intelligence Report on Benin City by H.F. Marshall. It says, in this report, I propose, okay, let me go back here just a bit. Okay, let me start from here. In this report, I propose only to deal with the history of the Benin Kingdom. A fairly full history of Benin was contained in an intelligence report compiled by Mr. H.I. Heavens, district officer, in 1924. And it has also been dealt with in various published works, notably Great Benin, Its Customs, Arts and Horrors by H. Lingroth, who, by the way, this book, which by the way we have here, this book, Great Benin, Its Customs, Arts and Horrors by H. Lingroth, is here as well. We may not read it today, but just know that we have everything we need. And then you also notice the consistency, something in 1924, something in 1936, this one is 1940. You have H. Lingroth's work, there's congruence. Everybody agrees until 1970. What happened in 1970, we'll discuss that much later. Let's read this one. H.F. Marshall, Intelligence Report on Benin. According to Benin tradition, Ife, locally known as Uhe, this is the same thing that Jacob Egariva said. Obagodo left Uhe, in bracket, Ile Ife. It's now you hear them say that the Uhe is somewhere else. The father said this. So I'm listening to the ancestors. According to Benin tradition, Ife, locally known as Uhe, was the cradle of the human race and was the only land in the world. Oduduwa, the first king of Ife, possessed a snail shell, which had the magical power of death. Oduduwa called his 7 sons and, giving to each of them a portion of the medicine from the magical snail shell, sent them out to form the inhabited world. One of Oduduwa's sons was called Obanigodo, Obagodo, and on receiving his share from the magical snail shell, he set out with his followers to the southeast. It's not southeastern part of Nigeria, it's southeastern part of Ife. Southeast from Ife. Where were we? Because people can hear things. By the way, when you hear he had 7 sons times, it doesn't have to be exact. It's usually symbolic. So you have things, people say things like 40, 200, 400, 70. Those are the numbers that you use, 7. Those numbers are symbolic of abundance, like Okpo. I'm just trying to explain because there are many, you hear different things from different places. Oh, you go to this place where somebody lived for 200 years. It just means the person lived for a very long time. It's not necessarily exact numbers. That's why we usually have this confusion when we deal with errors in ancient history. But let's get back to this. One of Oduduwa's sons was called Obanigodo, and on receiving his share from the magical snail shell, he set out with his followers to the southeast, creating land as he went. He finally reached the present site of Benin, and there he and his followers settled down and gave the place the name of Ugodonigodo. Certain of the present inhabitants of Benin claim to trace their descent from this first migration. Let me explain something. Thank you. Great Time is 77 says exactly. Because not come back 1, 2, 3, 200. But that's a very perfect example. Thank you for that. Back to this. If you listen very closely, you discover that the story here and that one of Jacob Egareva, they are the same. However, if you listen even more closely, you discover that it's also similar to the creation story of the Yoruba people with Oduduwa. The idea of earth being poured to the earth, being poured on the water. According to the original story from the beginning, they are saying that the only place on earth that had land was Ife. What are they telling you? They are showing you vital connection to the source of the monarchy. By the way, a lot of what we call history, we have to understand it from a position of myth, or else we get confused. When you hear about Oduduwa creating earth and carrying sand and pouring it, that's a myth of origin. Myth of origin is not telling you that in reality he came and was pouring sand. It's telling you, it's trying to answer the question of origins and ownership. That need be you, it tells you that nothing before this man means anything. This is the beginning of our journey. That is the same thing they're doing with Obagozo in Benin. Before him, there was nothing. He just came with sand from his father and poured it here and see where we are. The essential thing is that you see a copy of the Ife myth in this, playing out before you. Are hearing snail, magic snail shell, sand. It's not like he was pouring sand physically, because I think it also throws people off something like, that's not the point. The point is that he has the capacity to create just like his father did. But the point also is that we're reading Benin narrative. So this is not from Ife or Yoruba people saying anything. Stay with me, please. Are no longer prepared to accept this traditional story, but claim that the original inhabitants came straight from Egypt. There is no tradition and even less evidence on which they can base this claim. On the other hand, there is the undoubted fact that linguistic experts are agreed that the Edo language is unconnected with Yoruba, and certain Edo villages, notably Udo and certain of the Isi villages, have their own story of the creation, which appear to have nothing to do with Ife. The story of creation given above probably refers only to a ruling class who came from Ife and found here an earlier race of whose origin nothing is known. So essentially saying that by 1940, you have the intelligentsia, those who had gone to school, now saying, no, we're not from Ife, it's not about that, we are from Egypt. Why? If you remember what we discussed last week, the reason for this is the same reason why Samuel Johnson was writing about the Eastern connection in the story of Oduduwa and Yoruba people. It's not that we are from Mecca, it's not that we are from Egypt, it's that in the late 19th century, there was a preponderance of studies and artifacts and materials and research work being done on Egypt, which was called Egyptology. And because it was in the black nation, and it was on the black continent, and it was black, and it was great, and it was fantastic, and it had kings, and it had monarchies, and it had pyramids, and it had sphinx, and it had this and that. All of us definitely must have come from there. So a lot of people were trying to now trace themselves, whether it's by force or by fire, that somehow they are connected to Egypt. They tried to do it with the history of Yoruba in the 1890s. The book was completed in 1897 by Samuel Johnson. They sent it to be published in the UK, and then they said it was lost. His brother, Obadiah Johnson, helped to write it and eventually published it in 1921. That claim the Benin process in 1940. But it doesn't change the fact that traditionally, that's the story of where they come from. So what have we learned so far? We have learned that and by the way, before I tell you what we have learned so far, the last line in what I just read says that that the story of the creation that they had, it says that other people in that area also had sorry, please, someone just wrote something in the comment section. I need to quickly answer this, please. To be fair, Samuel Johnson did not link us with Nimrod. It was actually Sultan Bello who did that. Lamurudu was not a creation of Samuel Johnson. He was tagging along with what Sultan Bello had written about Hugh Clapperton. We don't know Lamurudu. We are not from Mecca. We are not from Egypt. Oduda was born and bred in Yorùbá land. I hope that answers the question. All right, so the writer is saying that there are other people. Thank you, sir. There are other people in the Edo area who also have different stories. So he's saying this particular story about this Obagodo, it seems that it's actually the story from the ruling class. So let me read to you. It says, number one, it should be noted that certain of the intelligentsia are no longer prepared to accept this traditional story, but claim that the original inhabitants came straight from Egypt. There is no tradition and even less evidence on which they can base this claim. On the contrary, on the other hand, there is the undoubted fact that linguistic experts are agreed that the Edo language is unconnected with Yorùbá, and certain Edo villages, notably Udo and certain of the Isi villages, have their own story of creation, which appear to have nothing to do with Ife. The story of the creation given above probably refers only to a ruling class who came from Ife and found here an earlier race of whose origin nothing is known. I have always said the connection between Yorùbá and Benin is primarily through their kings. The connection is not about the people of Benin being connected to Yorùbá people. That is not historically accurate. In actual fact, the connection is between the Benin monarchy and the Yorùbá people. And it's not something unusual, right? It's the same thing you find with the royal house of England and the Germanic people. The locals, right, the folks who you would call the British or the Britons, the Celts, who were inhabiting the British Isles before the arrival, I'll use the word arrival, of the Angles and Saxons, they didn't have anything to do with what we now call the Windsor family. Okay? By the way, Windsor is a name that they just adopted just about a century ago, thereabout, because the original name sounds too German. Somehow, the pronunciation Oman beats me, so let me look for the pronunciation I read to you. Somehow Saxo-Borg or something. It's very Germanic. Saxe-Coburg and Gotha. Saxe-Coburg and Gotha. That's the original name of the English monarchy. It's German. Okay? The Angles and Saxons got into the land, invaded the place, did what people do, and established a new order. It's how the world works. I mean, that's how it used to work back in the day. What I'm trying to say basically is that to have the monarchy of the Benin connected to Yoruba people is like having the monarchy of England connected to the Germans. And that's what it is, by the way, just to be clear. It's not made up. And you can go and fact check. Like I said, the name Windsor is something that they started using in 1917. Yeah, just about 100 years ago. And it was because there was strong anti-German feeling after the First World War, or during the First World War. So they decided to use a name that sounded a bit softer, and so they chose Windsor, and that's why now you say, you know, the Windsor Castle, which is where the President Tinubu will be attending. You know, is it tomorrow? Yeah, for tomorrow. Windsor. Even though now it's Mountbatten, Windsor. But you get the point. What I'm saying basically is that it is not... Okay? Okay. How come you are saying the king is connected to you? As a matter of fact, and we're going to get to it in this series, in the palace of the Oba of Benin, the official language used to be Yorùbá. You know he has Orikisha. Again, not yet, but we'll get to all of those things. Oba of Benin has Oriki. And if you listen to the Oriki, number one, you made a lot of Oriki in Nigeria, apart from Yoruba people. And then the Oriki itself connects him to Odudua, connects him to Ife. But like I said, we'll get to all of that momentarily. Let's just go back to the book by H.F. Marshall as we go on with the story and find the correlation between what he's saying and what Jacob Egariba said in his book. So back to Intelligence Report on Benin, published again in 1940, just like, in Edo was published much earlier. Back to this. The descendants of Obanigodo are said to have ruled in Ugodonigodo or Igodomigodo. It's the same place. The name was later changed to Ile for many generations. Their names, however, are not remembered except for the last of the line, who was known as Ogiso. The whole period is commonly referred to as the Ogiso period. According to tradition, although Ogiso had very many wives, he had only one son who was called Kaladera. It's the same story, but let me just read it. His wives persuaded Ogiso to consult an oracle to discover the cause of the barrenness. He sent his senior wife to the oracle, and when she returned, she reported that Kaladeran was the cause and that the oracle had said that he must be killed. Yielding to the persuasion of his wives, Ogiso finally agreed that Kaladeran should be killed, but gave secret instructions to the executioners that he should be spared, provided that he did not return to Benin. Kaladeran gave the necessary undertaking, and after wandering in the bush, settled down and formed the village of Ugoton. It seems probable that at this time, Ile consisted of a number of scattered hamlets situated between the present side of Benin and the Oba River, and that each of these hamlets was under the control of its elders. After the death of Ogiso, the one unifying force had gone, and a state of internecine war broke out between the hamlets. At last, some of the elders decided to ask the Ooni of Ife, locally called the Oganehue, to send a son to rule over them. This policy was, however, opposed by Evian, the most powerful of the elders, and perhaps by others. It is said that Evian sent to the ferrymen at Ovia, Ose, to cross the river, and that the first two sons sent by Ooni of Ife were drowned by these ferrymen when crossing the river. Let me quickly explain something before we now. I won't tell you all the history today, just something enough to get us into how everything changed. Today, all I want to do is just Ogiso when everything changed, and then we'll call it today. So here's the history. It's by Dimitri. I want to get you the name. Ancient Benin, where are the kings from? I just found it here. Ancient Benin, where did the first monarchs come from? Next class, I will start with that one. Let me just establish what I want to establish. But this one we're establishing. Odudua was in Ife on his own. There was no Ekaja did not even exist because nobody had given birth to him. Why are we doing this? Because we asked for it on Friday, but really because the internet is filled with all kinds of ridiculous claims. And we even heard the king saying that, oh, they have their own story, but at least he said that they should not impose it on others. So that's, for that, he has my respect. But even then, dynasty, called it Ogiso dynasty. Kings of the sky. He came first, after him was Ere, after him was Orire, and so on and so forth. They had a lot of Ogisos. And then at some point, I'm going to get this from Bondarenko much later. At some point, this whole story of Ekaradan came in. Ogiso, again, is not the name of a person, it's a title. The Ogiso had many wives, had a son called Ekaradan, wanted his wives to have more children, other wives didn't have any kids. Sends his eldest wife, to go to the oracle, or to consult the oracle, They told them what to do, like we read. And eventually, Ẹkáàbọ was banished, right? Only for them to discover that it was not even the cause of their problem. It was one of the wives who didn't allow others to get pregnant. But here's the part we're going to read much later from Bonarenko. That okay, we even read it from Megariba earlier. When they went to now call Ẹkáàbọ to come become the next Ogiso, he refused. And so they now had international Kini where they were fighting amongst themselves until an administrator arose among them. His name was Evian. Evian was not part of the line or lineage of the Ogisos or anything. He was just an administrator, but he took over the place. And while he brought some, and they made him the administrator because he had killed, a terrible beast that used to disturb them. So he killed that beast. Thank you very much, Abi 71. He killed that beast, so they made him an administrator. He did something very heroic. But then after a while, they say, you know what, we've got to get back to Ife and get us one king. Now, how they go back to Ife and what happened in that area, in that scenario, that part of the story, I won't talk about it now, at least for now. By the way, I'm not doing all this because I don't want to talk. I'm just trying to restrict what we're saying to something, but I want to give an idea of other things that we may talk about later. Okay, so I'm not trying to, it's not like I'm withdrawing information or anything or withholding information. Anyway, then requested Ife, so to speak, according to their own history, that Ife should send them a new leader. The question you ask yourself is, why would they go to Ife? The reason is because the one that founded the dynasty was from Ife, the original dynasty of Ogiso, not the Oba or Oromio. We've never gone to Oromio here at all. This is way before Oromio. A lot of Ogisos had ruled before Oromio. The very first Ogiso was Yoruba, the second was Yoruba, the third was Yoruba. This, again, doesn't mean that the people of the land are Yoruba. It just means that the people who have come to head them were Yoruba. And what they did is similar to what Oromio did in Oyo, or what Oduduwa himself did in Ife. The difference is just that both Oduduwa and the people were Yoruba. Both Oromio and most of Oyo were Yoruba. But in this case, Obagodo and Oromio who were Yoruba, but the people of the land were not Yoruba, but they still did what they did. Brought them together and became their king. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like I said, it happened in England as well. If you look through world history, you're going to find it in different places. I like England because it's close to us. They colonized Nigeria, so it might be easier to fact check that one. They sent two people, or they sent one person, Evian, made sure that they killed that person at Ose River. They sent another person, and they sent the third one. The third one happened to be Oromio. I'll read some things to you from H.F. Marshall, and then we'll go to how the story changed, because that's what I want to talk about today. All of this is just introduction. Back to H.F. Marshall. So it says here, at last, some of the elders of Igodomigodo, some of the elders decided to ask the Ooni of Ife, locally called the Ogenen Hue, to send a son to rule over them. This policy was, however, opposed by Evian. Who is Evian? The administrator at the time, because he was now in charge. So, of course, it would be difficult for him to want to just give that power away. The most powerful of the elders, and perhaps by others, it is said that Evian sent to the ferrymen at Ovia or Ose. So, I want to name boats. Told those people are walking on the river, essentially, boatmen, ferrymen. That listen, anybody that's coming from Ife, let me show you. It is said that Evian sent to the ferrymen at Ovia Ose and instructed them that they were not to allow anyone from Ife to cross the river, and that the first two sons sent by the Ooni of Ife were drowned by these ferrymen when crossing the river. The Ooni was finally persuaded to send his third son, Oromio. He was wiser than his brothers and did not attempt to come to Ile or Igodomigodo directly, but settled at Usein to the west of the Ovia, the west of Ose River. The elders who were sent for him went to meet him at Usein, and it was probably Oromio who conferred on them the Yoruba titles, which are now known as the Uzama titles. There were 5 of them in number, and the title conferred on them were Olia, Edoem, Ezomo or Ojomo. It's written that way. Ezomo or Ojomo, Ero, and Heholo. Oromiyo also conferred the title of Oloton on his own brother, who had accompanied him from Ife. That's the Oba Oluwari in Use, who had accompanied from Ife, called Erimide from Ego, a village near Ile. According to the story, Oromiyo, having first bribed the ferrymen, then moved towards Ile and got as far as Uzama, just to the northwest of the present city wall. There he was crowned and settled down, surrounded by his supporters, the Uzama. The greater part of the country, under the leadership of Evian, still refused to recognize him, and even his own supporters were so truculent that he decided that only one of themselves could rule over them, and decided to go back to Ife, having first renamed the country Ile Binu, a name which corrupted to Benin, struck sufficiently long to become known to the early European explorers, although to the native themselves it has been known as Edo since the reign of Oba Eware. Oromiyo left is written Oromiyo or Agamiyo, but I'm using Oromiyo because that's what we know. Oromiyo left behind him his wife Erimide, who at the time of his departure was pregnant. So unlike what you heard in the video earlier, the Oromiyo did not give birth to a son and name the child. He wasn't even around. The wife was pregnant when he left. Oromiyo left behind him. Sorry guys, there's a clown on my YouTube page. I think he wants my attention. I'll just send you to the naughty corner. 30 minutes. God bless you. Where were we? Oromiyo left behind his wife Erimide, who at the time of his departure was pregnant. Oromiyo said that she would bear him a son, and this child, being himself half Benin, should rule over the people. Although Oromiyo is supposed to have been crowned at Uzama, he is not generally included in the list of Obas, but according to the present Oba, Eware II, it says he's making Oromiyo the first one, and he is the 40th. After the departure of Oromiyo, his wife gave birth to a son, as he had predicted. It is said that this child was born dumb, but that when he was a boy, he was playing the game known as Akwe with other boys, and in the excitement of winning the game, he suddenly exclaimed, Owomika, meaning I succeed. He was nicknamed Owomika, which was later corrupted to Eweka, and he was crowned under the name as Uzama. We'll stop here and I'll read something else from Egareva before I now go to the book for today's topic. Go. We see. I'm going to go back to a short history of Benin by Jacob Egareva. So he talked about the Ogisos that they had at the time. He says, for a considerable number of years after the death of Ogiso, there was an interregnum, and the following leaders of the people, Ere, Orire, Akwa-Akwan, Ekpigo, Oria, Emose, Ororo, Obioye, Arigo, Evian, and his son Ogiame administered the Republican form of government. 1 second. They administered a Republican form of government. At that time, the country was known as Igodomigodo. The Oludonri of Idonri Evin was a priest and followed Oba from Hue, who afterwards posted him in charge of the god Oron at Idonri. Another tradition says that Oba met some people who were in the land before his arrival. It is to them probably that we owe our language. Similar to what Jeff Marshall said, that there are people in the land as well. Now, the coming of Prince Oromiyo and the opening of the second period about this date, let's just leave the date alone. I'm saying that because more details have come out since the book was published about how inconsistent the dates are, but we'll come back to that later. The administration of the Republican rulers, especially that of Evian and his son Ogiame, was unsatisfactory. Things were going from bad to worse, and the people saw that there was great need for a capable ruler. Ambassadors were therefore dispatched to Hue, Ile-Ife, not something in Kogi State. Like, why are people lying? They will call anywhere else, but I won't say it now. You just want to change your history for no reason. When you have a reason, but the reason, to be honest, is mostly political expediency in the Nigerian state. Has nothing to do with the real history, essentially. It's just someone making something up not to look big, which is totally unnecessary. So, he's saying that they sent ambassadors to Uhe, Ile-Ife, by the elders. Sorry, let me just read that according to what he wrote here. Ambassadors were therefore dispatched to Uhe, Ile-Ife, by the elders, requesting that the wise prince be sent to be their ruler. The prayers of the people had the desired effect, and subsequently Prince Oromio was sent accompanied by courtiers, including Ogiefa, a magician, and he succeeded in reaching the city after much trouble at Ovia River with the ferrymen. You remember what we read the other one? The last leader, Ogiame, was much opposed to his coming. By the way, Ogiame is the son of Evia. The Ogiame still exists today in Benin. But like Ogiso, it's now a title, not just a person's name. Originally, it was the name of the son of Evian, but has become the title of all their leaders now. And you have to go back to when we discuss the Ekiopaga Treaty. Is not Yorùbá. Ekiopaga Treaty. If I'm not pronounced correctly, pardon me. You will know more about how that, the role of Ogiame, the role he played in the found when they were trying to found Benin, and that was under Oba Ewedo. We'll get to that later. We have a lot of later in this because the thing is plenty, but we'll get there. Let's continue. So he says here, the prayers of the people had the desired effect, and subsequently Prince Oromio was sent accompanied by courtiers, including Ogiefa, a magician, and he succeeded in reaching the city after much trouble at Ovia River with the ferrymen. The last leader, Ogiame, was much opposed to his coming. He gave as his reason that it was difficult. Yeah, hence his name, Ogiame. But as the need for a proper Oba was felt to be so great by the inhabitants, no need was paid to his advice. Prince Oromio took up his abode in the palace built for him at Usama by the elders, now a coronation shrine. Soon after his arrival, he married a beautiful lady, Erinwide, daughter of Ogiedo, by whom he had a son. After some years residence here, he called a meeting of, actually it was there for only 2 years, but details. After some years residence here, he called a meeting of the people and renounced his office, remarking that the country was a land of hatred, Ile Binu, by which name the country was known afterwards, and that only a child born, trained, and educated in the arts and mysteries of the land could reign over the people. He caused the son born to him by Erinwide to be made Oba in his place and returned to his native land, Uhe, Ile-Ife, leaving Ogiefa, Ihama, Oloton, and others at Benin City in charge of his son. Ogiefa had repeatedly come from Uhe, that's Ile-Ife, to Benin City for the practice of medicine prior to his accompanying his master, Prince Oromio. Hence, every member of the family of Ogiefa is flattered ever since by the title of Vianreto, child of the pioneer. While Ogiefa once was dancing with drums, Igede, in honor of his profession, Ogiame angrily sent his son Ubi to stop him. Ubi treated Ogiefa with every indignity and cut his drum with a knife. Ogiefa, however, went to beg Ogiame to allow him to continue his practice. And a few years afterwards, Ogiefa gave his daughter Ewere in marriage to Ubi, the son of Ogiame, in order to play Ile-Ife to Benin, where Elawe and the early people of Usen. Also the Oloba, who later founded the Oba near Akure, where Oromio halted on his return journey from Benin to Uwe. Akure had not then come into existence as a town. Note, Prince Oromio of Uwe, Ile-Ife, the father of Eweka I, Oba of Benin, was also the father of the first Alafin of Oyo. All right. All is true. Everything true. And he also mentioned Oba. Oba is the one in Ondo State now. Okay, so we have an idea, at least a rough idea. We'll go into details much later, but we have a rough idea, from those two books at least. And I told you why I read those books. Those books were written before the revision started. And it gives you an idea, the connection between Yoruba people and Benin. The connection is not really with the people of both places. It's with the people of Yoruba land and with the monarchy of Benin. So it's not like, oh, Benin people are part of Yoruba people, that they are their own people. They have their own identity. But you see, the kings, they are descendants of Oromiyan. But even before Oromiyan, the story goes all the way back to Obagudo, who was also, of course, a Yoruba man from those two books. So here's a question. If the ancients believe the story, share the story, told their children, this is who we are, this is how we're connected to Yoruba people, what changed? By the way, again, I'm saying this, I know I'm saying repeatedly for a particular reason. This is not a case of Benin people are Yoruba. That's not what we are doing here. Because I don't want, because we have all these funny people that will come around making noise. Nobody is saying that here. Benin people are not Yoruba, but there are some of those who accompanied Oromiyan to Benin or to Usen, who are to Uselu, who still greet themselves Lawe or Lamogun in Benin today. They are part of those who moved with him when they went to Benin. They are Yoruba. So there are some leaders, some Yoruba families and the king. Those are the ones that are connected directly to Yoruba people. Not everybody in Benin. So it's important to make that very clear. Having said that, let's now go to why we are here. You'll be wondering, so what have we been doing since? We've been laying foundation. Our foundation is good enough now. Omolomo says, my in-laws. That's good, well done. Now, what we came to read today is how everything changed. So I'm going to read to you from a journal. This is a journal of the Historical Society of Nigeria. It was published in 1976. Someone says, in addition, they still keep Yoruba names. Yes, Omolomo, they still keep Yoruba names. They still greet. And Benin has this very interesting thing where they greet based on origins. So if you're from Uwe, you greet Lawe or Lamogun. Ogun, of course, is from Ife. Which is quite interesting, the way that is. Let me just quickly read some questions. White Kubo says, do you think the aborigines of Ile Bino could have been related to the hotheads across the... Nah, Jesus Christ. You just gave me bazooka. Why? Okay, only sorry, respectfully, the hot-headed people on the east bank of the Niger. Ekushe, Ekpele, Shajendake. I mean, I don't think so. I mean, the connection between them is actually quite interesting. Maybe we're going to get to it. The connection between Benin and Igbo people. I think that's the question you're asking. Maybe we'll get to that eventually. But let's just stick to their kings for now. Someone says, all the Obas keep Yoruba names, even those unknown to the public. Yes, Ewari. I mean, this is the second, the Oba now. Oba Polopolo is Oba Ewari the second. The first one, his name is actually Ogun. See, they were not ashamed. It wasn't something to be ashamed of. That it wasn't something to be ashamed of. I mean, up until 1937, when they had the first meeting of the Yoruba Council of Chiefs, Jeba Benin was there. I don't know if you've seen that picture before we even start reading. It was something to be proud of. We're family. We're family. It's not, and that's why I'm saying that. That's why I'm saying that this conversation is not about, oh, somebody is bigger than the. You can't be saying they are bigger than. It's not. It's a family thing. Like, I'll look for that picture and show it to you guys. Okay, I have the picture here. Held at the Alaafin's Palace in Oyo. The Oni was appointed permanent chairman, and then they were having annual council with key rulers. I'll show you the picture. It wasn't anything to be ashamed of. It was a family affair. Up until recently, till you have the Oni at the center, you have the Alaafin, you have the Aujale, You have the Alake, and you have the Oba of Benin. 1937, the first official meeting of the Yorùbá Oba. Listen, no. By the way, I've also heard people say things like, "Oh no, it was Western region." There was no Western region in 1937. No, there was no Western region. There was no war in politics or anything. I was in politics, but they were still in NYM. They had nothing to do with what's going on here. It was called Yoruba Council of Obas. There's a reason why Benin is Oba now. It could have taken any title. It should be a title of his father's. I don't know. People think it's shameful. I think it's beautiful. Like, it's just wonderful. I don't know. I mean, even my aunt, she's late now. Whenever they talk about Benin, they call it Ibini. They call it Ibini, in Ife. Ibini. They talk about it like family, like Arawa. Like, it's not like it's Yoruba land, but the point is that it's still part of us, something like that. That's the mindset about Benin. Until, of course, people start thinking that somehow it makes them feel less or anything. Let me read you from here. Inaugural meeting of the Yoruba Council of Obas, 1937. The official first meeting of the Yoruba Obas took place at the Palace Hall of the Alaafin of Oyo. And then the people that were there, Oba Daniel Adesonya Belegua II, Awujale of Jebu, Osole Ekanbi, Awujale of Jebode, Oba Shinyobola Onikepe Oladigbolu, that's the Alaafin of Oyo at the time. Obadesoji Tadeniawo Aderemi. All right. That's the one that Bodilon Street in Okoye. It was named after him. He was the governor of Nigeria at the time. Omonoba Anedo Uku Apolopolo Akenzwa II, Oba of Benin. Oba Akenzwa that went to this Yoruba Oba meeting was the one who was on the throne of Benin when they published that book. And then lastly, Obaladapo Samuel Ademola Alake of Egbaland. So that was the inaugural meeting. Now, that meeting did not happen because there was Western region. It happened because Yoruba Obas decided to meet together. And they appointed their father as a permanent chairman. And yes, it's their father. Obaladigbolu was the Alaafin at the time. As a matter of fact, it's actually their great-grandfather, if you're really keeping it a buck. Because Oromiyan is not able to do a son, it's his grandson. The king of Oyo is Oromiyan's son. The king of Benin is also another. They are great-grandchildren of Oduduwa and Ife. They made their father the permanent chairman when they met in 1937. Which is how it should be. Whatever happened is primarily because of the political situation in Nigeria. That's what is making people revise history, and it's unnecessary. So let's go to what they revised now. I'm going to read from that journal I mentioned earlier. It's the Journal of the Historical Society of Nigeria. It was published December 1976. This particular entry is called The Origin of the Eweka Dynasty of Benin, a study in the use and abuse of oral traditions. G.A. Akinola. All right. Until quite recently, all the known historical traditions about the origin of the Eweka dynasty. Who is Eweka? You know Eweka from what we read, Owomika. He couldn't speak as a child. They were playing a game, Akwe, and then he won. And then he shouted, Owomika, Owomika, and they started calling him Eweka. So when you hear Eweka, they're talking about the son of Oromiyan, you can call him the first or the second king of Benin, you'll be right, whichever one you put it. Sorry, however you put it, but you get the point, right? Okay, so he's saying here that until quite recently, all the known historical traditions about the origin of the Eweka dynasty of Benin were unanimous in saying that the first Oba of this dynasty was a son of Oromiyan, a prince of Ife, who came to Benin in response to the free invitation of the city's notables at a time of political instability. We know when instability happened, that was after the Ogiso era, when we had the interregnum. During the past few years, again, this was published in 1976, so when it says past years, it's talking about what happened in the 1970s, okay? During the past few years, however, a number of other traditions have been coming to light, challenging certain aspects of the accounts contained in the received traditions. Although one may be tempted to dismiss these recent stories as new inventions, there seems to be some definite worth in analyzing them and their claims. For example, it will be useful to examine them for consistency and relate them to other bits of evidence which demonstrate either tacitly or until early in this century quite actively the links between the Ife and Benin ruling dynasties. But it ought to be pointed out that the aim of this essay is not to establish the truth of the received traditions as such and so on and so on. Let me just read. Indeed, it is doubtful whether this can ever be done in view of the absence of supporting archaeological and other documentary data. The point is that the received traditions give us an idea what the history is. What's the received tradition? What you heard from Megariva, what you heard from H.F. Marshall, that's the received tradition. In other words, it's been like that from when the place was settled. That's the story they've always told themselves. They told their children, their children's children, until it was written down. And then, about 40, 50 years after they started writing these things down, people started changing the history. Discounting an 1823 story of uncertain provenance, and according to which the founder of Benin dynasty was a white man who came from the Great Water, the earliest written record of the tradition ascribing the foundation of the present Benin dynasty to an Ife prince was by Talbot sometime in the 30s. And this is what Talbot said. What's he good do? Obagodo, Obanigodo, Igudu, they're talking about the same person. According to tradition, the first king of the country was Igudu, a Yorùbá chief named Ere. Stated that the Ogeni of Ufe in Yorùbá, Ooni of Ife, arrived with a small following but did not gain much power. His son Ogiso also made little headway and later returned to Ife. In 1300, the Ooni of Ife sent another son called Oromio, accompanied by a large following. He lived at Use for 3 years before returning to Ife. Talbot further adds that though Oromio reigned in Benin and founded the dynasty. By the way, if you are interested in that one, you have to. It's another book. It's called The Peoples of Southern Nigeria by P. Henry Talbot, but maybe some other time. 8 years after Talbot's sketchy story above had been published, the first definitive account of the origins of the Eweka dynasty appeared in a history of Benin by an Edo historian, Chief J.U. Egareva. That's the one we read earlier. This account, which has become so widely accepted as to acquire the characteristics of a tradition itself, is a synthesis and analysis of several traditions recited by many informants. In a sense, it is a pity that no record of these traditions exists in the form of which they were recited. It is therefore impossible to check whether any of the traditions used by Egareva in his history is substantially different in content from the general interpretation presented by him. However, taking Egareva's history as being a synthesis of the received traditions, the circumstances surrounding the establishment of the Eweka dynasty in Benin are summarized below. Prior to the establishment of the dynasty of Obas in Benin, the city's rulers were known as the Ogiso. The first Ogiso was Igodo. Who is Igodo again? Obagodo, Obanigodo, the one who was called the elder son of Oduduwa, according to Benin people. The first Ogiso was Igodo. But when you hear first son, sometimes even they will call him the first son because Oma found ni Igara. Our first son. Most time, everybody is somebody's first son. Even though you're wondering how many sons does he have? How many first sons does he have? It could be first son, it could also be first son from different mothers, but you get the point. Prior to the establishment of the dynasties of Obas in Benin, the city's rulers were known as the Ogiso. The first Ogiso was Igodo, who established a dynasty of kings, some 31 in all. This dynasty came to an end when its last ruler, Ogiso Owodo was banished from Benin as a result of popular hostility against his regime, which was marked by misrule and cruelty. His only heir, Ekaladeran, who would have succeeded him, had earlier been exiled to Ugoton. I hope you are noticing the consistency. His only heir, Ekaladeran, who would have succeeded him, had earlier been exiled to Ugoton, and although every attempt was made to persuade him to return to Benin after his father's banishment, Ekaladeran refused to leave Ugoton, where he eventually died. Ugoton is not Ife. Where he eventually died. Ugoton is not Ife. There was no Ekaladeran in Ife that was walking the streets, the bushes and the forests and just traveling. Is not true. It's a recent invention that makes absolutely no sense. But if you believe it in your place, it's good, but don't change history. God bless you. So it says here, he's only here, Ekaladeran, who would have succeeded him. We know how he banished him. We already read about that, Abi. So let me quickly pause and say something. From what I just read now, you notice something. I think I should quickly explain. This Ogiso Owodo they're talking about is the father of Ekaladeran. Why does work a synthesis? Because if you read and I mentioned it earlier, if you were here, if you read the Garawa's work, it made it look like it was just one Ogiso, and then it was one also had Ekaladeran, and then after him there was Ere and Oriri and so on and so forth. But in actual fact, there are many Ogisos, right? There were 31 in all, and that the last one who gave birth to Ekaladeran is the one who had a problem with his wife not having children, and then they banished his son. But later he himself was not dealt with. Then they begged him to come back, Ekaladeran to come back. He did not return to Benin. He died at a place called Ugoton. He did not go to Ife. He is not from Ife. He is not Oduduwa. It does not even make sense because it was a different time from Oduduwa's time. So Ogiso Egodo or Bagodo, who quote unquote was the son of Oduduwa, had other people, other successors before the one who then gave birth to Ekaladeran. So it would not make sense to then say that it's the same person as Oduduwa. Let's go on. So he says here that although every attempt was made to persuade Ekaladeran to return to Benin after his father's banishment, Ekaladeran refused to leave Ugoton, where he eventually died. The people of Benin then decided to set up a republican form of government with a commoner named Evian as administrator, as a reward for the brave and meritorious service rendered by him to the community through killing a murderous beast. We mentioned that earlier as well. As his successor, and the Benin notables reacted against this by dispatching an embassy to Ife, asking the Ooni to send one of his sons to Benin for things, quote unquote, for things were getting from bad to worse, and the people saw that there was need for a capable ruler. End of quote. For peace, I don't, please, this is not the place. This is not the place. I'm quoting books. I'm mentioning sources. Don't continue nuisance in the comment section. I can either mute you or just get you out. Please, if you have anything against what I'm saying, you have to also go through the rigors of at least quote something according to this, not according to what you think. I don't care what you think. I don't even know you. Thank you. Where were we? And if you notice, since we started, we've been very courteous and gentle. Let's continue like that. God bless you. In his old age, Evian named his son Ogiame as his successor, and the Benin notables reacted against this by dispatching an embassy to Ife, asking the Ooni to send one of his sons to Benin. Quote, for things were getting from bad to worse, and the people saw that there was need for a capable ruler. End of quote. After the Ooni of Ife had secured assurances that his son would be welcome in Benin, Oromiyan was duly sent, accompanied by several courtiers. We already mentioned that it was a third that was sent. The first two were killed by the ferrymen who were sent by Evian. Oromiyan had lived in Benin for only a few years when he discovered that the country was a land of vexation and that only a child born quoting Egariva. Accordingly, he had his son, Eweka, born to him in Benin by Irene with the daughter of Onoge of Ego, to be installed as Oba in his place, while he himself left Benin for Ife. Throughout his residence in Benin and during the reign of his son Eweka, as well as those of his two successors, there was no resistance against the establishment of an quote-unquote alien dynasty. It was only when Ewedo, the fourth Oba of the new dynasty, decided immediately after his coronation to remove the seat of his government from Osama to the site of the present palace that war broke out between the Oba and Ogiame's faction. We call it Ogiame today, although back in the day they used to write it as Ogiamwen. Eventually, the latter were defeated, and Ewedo was therefore able to consolidate his hold on the throne. I want to quickly read something to you before I continue. I don't know if you've heard about I've mentioned earlier, Ekiokpaga Treaty. It was the treaty that was established between the Ogiame. By the way, Ogiame had now become a title at this point. It wasn't just a name, like I said. Ogiame originally was the son of Evian, who was the administrator of Benin after the era of the Ogiso. Ogiame had gone from being the name of a person to the title of the leaders of those people who chose not to be under the leadership of the Oba. Okay, that's why Evian resisted, the coming of Oba from Ife anyway. So I'll see if I can show you the image here. This was published in the newspaper. Oh dear. I'm going to read to you. Okay, let me show it to you so that you understand that. I want to make sure that we're all on the same page. We don't have all this thing of what's it saying? Is it making things up? Because we've been seeing people already. So there's an image that I started seeing this image years ago. Anyway, the memorable Ekiokpaga Treaty between Ogiame Erebo and Oba Eweka is actually not Eweka, it's supposed to be Ewedo in 1200 AD, formally signed by Ogiame Ode and Oba Ewedo in 1255 AD, which all past Obas had complied with and restricted by Ogiame Osarebo Okongwe on Oba Eredua in 1979, as shown in the above paragraph. This is what they're talking about. So what happened essentially was that Oba Ewedo was moving the capital from where his great-grandfather had established it outside of Benin. He was relocating it to Benin, which led to a war between himself and the Ogiame, and they had that war, and they won. The Ewedo faction won. Then they established their place, but they had a treaty with the people, and that treaty is not today's topic, but maybe another day we'll talk about it. There are specifics, the things that the Oba was supposed to do, what Benin land, where in Benin land belonged to the Oba, which one belongs to the Ogiame, all those things, the details are all in this treaty, and we have a copy of it here. We'll go back to the book we were reading earlier. Just a second. So he says here that it was only when Ewedo, the fourth Oba of the new dynasty, decided immediately after his coronation to remove the seat of his government from Usama to the site of the present palace, that war broke out between the Oba and Ogiame's faction. Eventually, the latter were defeated, and Ewedo was therefore able to consolidate his hold on the throne. From the above, it can be seen that the received traditions as recorded by Talbot and Egariva are in agreement about the identity and antecedents of the first Oba of Benin and the circumstances in which his dynasty was established. These crucial points, incidentally, are the very ones over which the new traditions take issues with the received traditions. In other words, the idea of where Eweka came from, how Ewedo got here, all those things that have to do with the dynasty is what is being questioned with this new so-called, how do you call it now, new traditions, right? As against the received traditions. And when you hear the word received, it means that this is what we got from our ancestors. They also got it from their fathers and got it from their fathers and so on and so forth. So we received it. But this one are just creating something new and is against what we've always known as the received tradition. Let's go on. This is where it gets very, very interesting. Buckle your seatbelt. were about to fly. The present writer's attention was drawn to the first of these new traditions in 1970. A work under the title of Edo History in TypeScript by a certain S.B. Omorige. Subsequently, 3 other versions of these new traditions appeared at different times in Midwestern, now Bendel State's Sunday Observer. As is to be expected in these amateurish historical works, no attempt is made to cite the sources of information or the names of the informants. Apart from the version by Omorige referred to above, the other 3 new accounts are from Edo Kezua, D.U. Edebiri, and Iyari. For the purposes of brevity and because of the new traditions, let me explain before we go into this stuff. It's saying that we've always had this story from the ancients, from the elders, from the ancestors, right? And I started publishing it in the 1930s with a Gary As a matter of fact, Talbot had written about it earlier. And then there was another colonial official who wrote about it. And then he then had Jacob Agariba wrote about it in 1934 in Edo, then published it in English language in 1936. Then you had H.F. Marshall who wrote about it and published in 1940, 41. But the first time somebody wrote something to counter what we've always known was in 1970. So all this revision that you hear, it's not ancient. Excuse me, it's not ancient. It just started in 1970. And the first person who wrote something like that is S.B. Omorige. But there are 4 of them in that same period. 4 of them wrote. One was S.B. Omorige, who actually wrote a book, something like a book. The others wrote in a newspaper. Midwestern, they now call it, at the time in 1976 it was called Bendel, but at the time it was Midwestern. Why? Because again, Midwest was there up until 1967, but they still had the paper. And then by in the 1970s, they had changed the name to Bendel, essentially covering that side. Now, they had no references, they quoted nobody, they just wrote their own. Yari, Edebiri, and Akenzwa, plus the one by Omorige. Those 4 started giving us Lamba in 1970. That's where the Wala began. Why are we talking about this? Because somebody mentioned last week, is what happened in Oyo similar to what happened in Benin? Yes. A lot of people just change stuff as though every other person is sleeping. They are the ones that can rewrite history. You can't rewrite history when it happened, not just to you, but to others as well. That's the tricky thing about history. From the above, okay, we read that already. So it says here, let's start from here. The present writer's attention was drawn to the first of these new traditions in 1970. A work under the title of Edo History in TypeScript by a certain S.B. Omorige. Subsequently, 3 other versions of these new traditions appeared at different times in Midwestern, now Bendel State's Sunday Observer. As is to be expected in these amateurish historical works, no attempt is made to cite the sources of information or the names of the informants. Apart from the version by Omorige referred to above, the other 3 new accounts are from Edo Kezua, D.U. Edebiri, and Iyari. For the purposes of brevity, and because the new traditions relate, in fact, 2 main stories. And because I'll tell again, for the purposes of brevity, and because the new traditions relate, in fact, 2 main stories, a discussion of their accounts will be undertaken by taking them in pairs, beginning with the first pair, that of Omorige and Edo Kezua. We are told that when the era of the Ogisos ended, and Ogiame had succeeded his father, Evian, the commoner who had become ruler after the banishment of Ogiso Wodo, the Benin notables indeed had a prince from Ife in Yorùbá land. But Omorige identifies this prince with Ekaladera, the only son of Ogiso Wodo, who had been exiled to Ugoton on his father's orders. Ekaladera eventually fled from Ugoton and wandered into the forest until he came to Ife, where he settled under the name of Omonoyo. Please pay attention. You see how warped this thinking is, but just stay with me. His popular nickname is Omonoyo. At the court of the Oni, Ekaladeran was accepted as a prince and his name corrupted into Oromio. Years afterwards, there came a delegation from Benin to, I'll explain. There came a delegation from Benin to bring Ekaladeran back to the city. Permission for this was granted, and Ekaladeran, alias Omonoyo, alias Oromio, went to Benin, accompanied. I don't know who you are, but you're a bad person. I see what you wrote in the comment section. Let me go back to what I'm reading. Ekaladeran, alias Omonoyo, alias Oromio, went to Benin accompanied by a number of Yorùbá dignitaries. What did you just hear? Let me tell you, let me just bookmark so I'll know where to go back to. What did you just hear? The very by Omorege in 1970 actually said Ogiso Wodo. Yes, he was banished. As a matter of fact, he had banished his own son, Ekaladeran, which is all true. But let's change it a bit. He didn't die in Ogoton. No, he didn't die in Ogoton. He traveled all the way to Ife. Ife to Benin is about 20 months. That's what this man wrote in his book, Journey from Ife to Benin. But he was able to wander through the forest, forget the snakes and Amotekun, and the Eko and the lions. He shall have found his way to Ife. When he now got there, he's not what the Oba of Benin just called no, he was Omonoyo. Or like somebody wrote in the comment section, Omoloyo. It was Omonoyo when he got to Ife. When he now got there, they now corrupted his name to Oromio. So much later, they now sent people from Benin to go and call somebody there. We know that he's in Ife. Go and call it for us. Ekaladeran must be in Ife. When he now got there, I said, Ekaladeran is now known as Omonoyo or Oromio. Oh yeah, let us go back to Benin. That's the first version. But that's not all. Let's go to the second version. Edwin Kenzua's account differs slightly from Omorege's. In the first place, the delegation from Benin to bring Ekaladeran, or Kaladeran according to Akenzua, back did not know where the prince was, or the existence of Ife for that matter. They did not know where Ife was. They didn't know where the prince was. They merely came to the kingdom by accident. And by this time, Ekaladeran was an old man, and they proposed that the emissaries should take his youngest child, Oromio, away with them. This was agreed to, and it was this Oromio who later bore a son, Eweka, the first Oba of Benin. Omonioko, Lo Shora Oni. You know the song by Shino Peters, Omonio. Someone wrote Omonio in the comment section. Omonio Bao. Here's the difference. So we've seen first part. The first part is that the man was Oromio, and that they came and picked him to make him king because it was the original Ekaladeran. The Akenzua version was that no, he was Oromio quite all right, but he grew old. No, sorry, it wasn't Oromio. He was the Ekaladeran quite all right, but he grew old in Ife. He now gave birth to a child. He now called that child Oromio. So when they now came from Benin, now said, take my son and go and make him your king. If you notice, they've not called Oduduwa yet though. Let's continue. The second pair of stories by D.U. Edebiri and E. Iyari are substantially the same and agree in the main with the first pair about the role of Ekaladeran. According to Edebiri, the latter wandered in the forest until he came to Ife, where he became prosperous and was made the head of the community. Then he started immediately to establish some structure of kingship, such as he was used to at home. Iyari, by contrast, has Ekaladeran arriving after his wanderings in the forest. Whose inhabitants were said to be used to constant riots and vandalism. Contrary to this reputation, however, the prince found the place calm and auspicious for a rest from his wanderings. He therefore told his followers, "Ewanwayihi," that is, this place looks calm, and it was the last word he that was polluted to Uhe, and thereafter provided the name for his new abode. Ha. He now became who? The Berolon. Berolon. Kí ló máa pe Berolon ní Arabic náà? I know it's not Okumula. Kí ló máa pe the other one náà? Ó yẹ ká máa Berolon. Irọ́ ẹ̀ pọ̀. Irọ́ ẹ̀ pọ̀. Someone said this story be like Hollywood. Now how they change is Takula. God bless you, Vojinodu. Takula. How can we change this? That's how they change the history of Benin. If you notice, there are 4 versions, but let's continue. So, Edebiri says that he established structure of kingship in Ife as it was used to at home. Which home? The structure in Ife was existing before the first Ogiso moved from Ife to Benin, but they are saying now that no, he was wandering, Osono, became a vagabond, walking to and fro the earth, eventually found himself in Benin. Now decided to create a structure in Ife like the one he left in Benin. This is the case of the father becoming the son. It's not different from what you are hearing about folks in Oyo as well. It's what happens when people become bigger than themselves. Someone said, Yare says, Ekaderan arrived after his wanderings in the forest at a nameless place. Yare said that contrary to his reputation, however, the prince found the place calm and auspicious for a rest from his wanderings. So he had gone around places, they were fighting, they were, he now found the place was calm. He now said, that is, this place looks calm. And it was the last word, he, that was polluted to Uhe, and thereafter provided the name of his new abode. The sequel to Ekaderan settling in Ife is so momentous that it ought to be quoted in full. This is the quote. His deep and perfect knowledge of governmental organization and military logistics, magical power and authoritative utterances, kindly bearing and princely paraphernalia soon won the hearts of the natives of Ife, who not only regarded him with wonders and awe, but thought that he was directly sent to them from heaven to lead them. Prince Ekaderan was declared the king and ruler of Uhe, Ife, by the natives, who looked towards him to establish a stable government and save them from the constant vandalism from their nearer kingdoms. On his installation day as first Oba of Ife, Prince Ekaderan exclaimed to his audience in Benin language, "Ikpomosa, Idodua," meaning I thank God I have chosen the path to greatness. The last word Idodua was polluted to Odudua by the Yorùbás. Is this not madness? Idodua ko. Igoduani Adarada. Let me come from today. You're just giving me fire answer comment section. Well done. Isakaba, Idodua, Ikpomosa, Idodua. Meaning I thank God I have chosen the path to greatness. Have you ever asked yourself, how come they've never had the Idodua festival in Benin? They always had the one of Odudua. Yes, they've never had an Idodua festival in Benin. Some years after the enthronement of Ekaderan as the ruler of Ife, Eyare goes on, his father, Owodo, in Benin, still without a male heir, ordered that a search for his son be organized, particularly in the regions to the west, from where news of the famed exploits and exploit of a new chief were filtering to Benin. His father's own journey to Ife to persuade him did not avail, except that Ekaderan promised that he might consider returning home after his father's death, or he might dispatch one of his sons to take up the throne of Benin. Renewed pressures on Ekaderan to return to Benin did not begin immediately after Owodo's death, as he was succeeded by Evian. But when the latter, in his old age, appointed his own son Ogiame to succeed him, there was a renewal of competition for political power, and in an attempt to put an end to this, the elders of the city again dispatched an embassy to Ekaladeran alias Odua of Ife, urging him to come to Benin and assume the throne. Again, he refused, but promised to send one of his sons, Omonoyo, later known as King Oromiyo of Benin, to become the Oba of Benin. Ekaladeran died before this could be accomplished, but his instruction that Omonoyo should be sent to Benin were carried out, and this is what they wrote in that funny book, or that funny. Prince Omonoyo concludes Eyare, one of the junior sons of Oba Odudua of Ife, and the grandson of Oba Owodo of Benin, was later accompanied by courtiers, including Chief Ogiefa, across the river Ovia to his grandfather's throne in Benin. Mosun Belambini. The motive is to separate themselves. Okay, let me go back just a little bit. Thank you for the question. We'll come back to this book. In 1955, there was a push by the Midwest to have their own state. And in having their own state, they planned to create a new identity for themselves. The idea was that this state, the Midwest, would be led by Benin people. Why? Because they were the majority in that collection of provinces. So the two provinces were the Benin and Delta provinces. So the Benin or the Edo people were more than others. Edo, of course, not just Benin. Edo will have the Ishan, will have folks in Auchi, will have the Benin themselves, and so on and so forth. So they were about 600,000 at the time. In 1957, there was, I know why I'm telling this history, just stay with me. 1957, 58, 57, there was the Willings Commission. 58, the report was published. Now, but the state was not created. Although Benin the Edo people were supposed to be the main people in that place because they had more numbers than any other group in the Midwest, the Igbos had already planned for them. By Igbos, specifically Azikiwe and his NCNC guys, and made sure that even though they were more than others, they were not going to be the ones in charge of power. He made sure that an Igbo man became the premier of the Midwest. The Igbo man's name is Dennis Osadebe. Now, in a bid to say we have moved away from Western region and to say we have our own identity, they were trying to sever ties and change everything that makes them subservient to the Yoruba people. I'll give an example. If you read the Willings Commission report, we'll have another time to discuss it. You see them referring to Ifa and Ogboni as though they were new inventions in Benin, which is dumb, because for many years, a lot of deities and religious artifacts and spirituality of Yoruba people had been imported, so to speak, into Benin. And there's nothing wrong with that, by the way. There was Shango, Olokun, Mailala, Ogun. That's why if you do any small thing now, Benin people say Ogun, Ogun, they'll call Ogun for you. Everything has already mixed. Ifa as well. For centuries. This is not something that happened because of Nigeria. But they needed to assert that when the Yoruba Obas had a meeting, Oba Benin was there. Oba Nkezwa was there in 37. By the 1960s, everything had changed. Of course, it was no longer the king. He had passed on at the time. Everything had changed. By the 1970s that we're talking about, after him, then the third king, Obaredwa. And then it was like a need to say we are our own people. And I get where that's coming from. It's just that if you want to rewrite your history, just stay with yourself. Don't rewrite the history of other people while you are writing your own. Just do what you want to do. So it's also what you hear some people say, oh, we are the Guinea Empire. It's what you're trying to sever ties and say, I am my own Guinea, but it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense because You see, if you begin to say, I have nothing to do with those from whom I came, I don't connect me with them, what will eventually happen is this: everybody that came out of you will also begin to cut off. That's what's happening on your now. 14 kings in one town, which is not a big deal because we have many kings in Ife, there are many kings in Ibadan, it has happened in different parts of Yorùbá land. But all those people in reality look up to the main king of the town. So for instance, all the kings in Ibadan still look up to the Olubadan. But it's not going to be like that in Oyo. It shouldn't be like that. And how did this thing start? Just begin to you. I'll change your AC. I'm your father. You are the father of your grandfather, of your great-grandfather. You are the father of your great-grandfather because you have to prove a point that you are starting a new political dispensation. Here's to a new dispensation. So if you ask, the summary of my answer is political experience. Just as they were out of the Western region, or the shadows of the Yoruba people. So when this thing is deep. They talked about Ifa, they talked about Ogun, they talked about Ogboni. So they were using Ogboni to take over Yoruba, or take over Benin. The thing that your people have been doing, and the one they were taking over that was quote unquote taking over Benin was actually reformed Ogboni, not the aborigine. So, to be honest, for the most part, what has caused this, whether in Benin or Oyo, is actually Nigeria. Particularly Benin. The Oyo thing is more ego. For Benin, is more trying to assert like, okay, we are our own people. They don't give you one fantastic myth of origin. The funny thing is this. We'll get to that later in this conversation. The true myth of origin that Benin people have are directly connected to Ife. It's funny how life works. Now, the funny thing, how do you go back to go and change those myths? I'll quickly read something here, then we'll come back and finish this. We'll continue from here next time, but let's finish some things here. It is clear that as far as the new traditions summarized above are concerned, Oromiyan, who was instrumental in founding of the Eweka dynasty in Benin, was not an alien, as given out in the received traditions. Rather, he was a Kaladera, but that's Omarige, his younger child, Edwin Akezwa, or one of his sons, Debiri and Yari. In other words, there was a real and significant link between the era of the Ogiso rulers and that of the Obas in Benin, a link provided through a Kaladera, the only heir of Owodo, the last Ogiso. More significantly, two of the new traditions have a novel explanation for the role of Ife and its influence on events in Benin immediately before and during the establishment of the Eweka dynasty. According to these traditions, not only was Oromiyan in actual fact not an Ife prince, it could not have been since there was no kingship in place when a Kaladeran arrived there during the course of his wanderings. Indeed, it was through a Kaladeran that the place acquired the name of Ife, and it was a Kaladeran who first established the institution of kingship in Ife. What are they saying here? They are saying basically that they are changing the history to say that, no, but either to say that the man who came to rule over them, of course, this is retroactive. The man who came to rule over them was actually from them, only moved to Ife and then came back. Or he moved to Ife, created the kingship in Ife, then sent his son back. In other words, no matter how you look at it, though, he was originally their own before he came to you, so that you cannot say you are their father. That's all this Trinity, that's all it's about. You cannot say a Yoruba man is the father of the Oba of Benin. That's what they're trying to do. They cannot cut it off totally because it's so, and you will love this series. We're going to read books. You will see what the Oba of Benin used to do early in the morning. You will pray. There's a particular place you will face. You will pray for the Oni. You will pray for the Alaafin. You will pray for other kings and himself. Someone says they already revealed their source. Exactly. Omonoba Nuhe. The thing is, you can't. So the idea basically is that it's too interwoven. The only thing you can do is to claim that you are the grandfather, or you are the father of your grandfather, or your father of the great grandfather. That kind of nonsense. But that's what people do when they're trying to change history. In order to find out what the current traditions in Benin say about the above problems, that is whether Eweka I, the first Oba of Benin, was in fact a son of Oromiyan, a prince of Ife, as in the received traditions, son of Kaladera, alias Oromiyan, the only heir of Owodo, last of the Ogiso rulers. According to the new accounts, the present writer 1973. My informants, we're going to start from here next time, but let me finish here. My informants included His Highness Akezua II, the then reigning Oba of Benin, 6 members of the Ihogbe, the worshippers and recorders of departed Obas. I'll tell that again. The worshippers and recorders of departed Obas, including Chief Samson Hihama, the leader, Chief S.E. Emokwe, a descendant of Jogiame, Chief J. Egareva, the leading historian of Benin, Chief Erobiamen, or Ehobamian, the Obadagmoyi of Benin, and a few others. In addition, I met a number of young men at informal discussions from which some significant impressions emerged. My most exciting experience was the meeting with the Ogbe and my interview with the Oba under rather interesting circumstances, which will be described below. In general, all the informants, except the Iogbe, narrated traditions which confirmed the substance of the received traditions. Most of the members of the Ihogbe whom I interviewed were young men, and they had apparently agreed beforehand on the testimony which their leader, the Hihama, should present. He was, however, occasionally interrupted during the course of his story, whose summary is as follows. During the reign of Ogiso Wodo, his only heir, Ekaladera, was exiled from Benin City. He wandered in the forest until he came to Ife, where he was made a king on account of the generosity of Mr. Tortoise. He later discovered this prince at Ife, where he had become very prosperous, and took reports of this to Benin. An invasion of Ife was mounted by Ekaladera. He invited his father Owodo to join him at Ife. On to change history now. It's a fifth version, but this one is coming from the young men in the palace, not the older ones. The older ones had the same story from the elders. These young ones have been influenced by newspaper reports. He now put a twist to it as well. So it says here that he invited his father Owodo to join him at Ife, and the Ogiso accordingly emigrated from Benin to spend the rest of his days with his son. The name Ife itself was derived from a Kaladian's phrase, Ile Ife, and it means I run to freedom. Ile. Meanwhile, Ogiso's vacation of his throne through his emigration to Ife had led to the assumption of power by Avian, whose regime began the Republican period of Benin's history. Eventually, the Benin notables decided to send a delegation to Ife to recall the Kaladian to Benin throne. He, however, refused, but sent his son Oromiyan, who came to Benin all by himself without being accompanied by any courtiers. I was eating. He therefore decided to leave Benin for home in Ife. At Tego village, he found a beautiful maiden, a slave named Eremwide, with whom he had an affair, assuring her that she would bear a male child who would become king. Oromiyan then continued his journey to Ife, while Eremwide subsequently became pregnant. When the pregnancy developed, messages were sent to Ife, and Oromiyan's second brother, by name Hihama, was dispatched to Benin, accompanied by two other brothers, Iletema and Ilegema, to take care of Eremwide. This explains, according to the informant, the Hihama's close relation with the Oba of Benin. Oromiyan's son was later born, and he became Eweka the first. All of this is absolute nonsense. The above testimony, apart from introducing the mythical element of Mr. Tortoise, carrying the story of Kaladera's prosperity of Ife to Benin, as well as the invasion of Ife from Benin and Owodo's apparent voluntary emigration from the city, agrees in the main with the stories of the new traditions. It corroborates it. Let's just stop here for now. If you notice, he mentioned of Akezwa, he mentioned the Ogbes, he mentioned the Gaiva and some other chiefs. The Gaiva also had to talk to the Ogbes in his own time, 40 years prior. They didn't talk about tortoise. Tortoise, Ijapa, took the story of the wealth of a man from Ife to Benin. Wow. What have we learned so far? We have learned that there is a connection between Ife and Benin. We have learned that there is something called received tradition, and is what the Benin people believe themselves. If you notice, I've not quoted anything that Yoruba people say about Benin, and that's because if you want to learn about the people, you listen to them. But go as far back as possible, because, like I say, people, they change history every market day. So if you want to go as far back as possible, you have to go to Talbot. You have to, and because he received the tradition, you have to go to H.F. Marshall. You have to go to their own man, Jacob Egarieva, whose version of events was not some that he wrote. There was no Mr. Tortoise in his own story. And I want to read again how he got his stuff, where he got the story from, or the history, is not just story, where he got the history from, and how he very quickly. It says here, the history was collected from the following authorities: Hiobe, the worshippers and recorders of the departed Obas; Ogbelaka, the royal bards; Igueronwo, the royal brassmith; Onhelsa of Apafa, one of the descendants of the Benin native fathers of the 15th and 16th centuries; Okaeben, Ogiame, Efas, Yashere, Esama, Erobamoy, and so on, to whom and it says here, he owes unbounded thanks. Then it says here that he was grateful to His Highness Akinzwa II, the same one that the writer Akinla went to meet in 1973 in Benin. He's grateful to His Highness Oba Akinzwa, the Oba of Benin, for his unfailing advice and aid by which I was able to complete this work in spite of its many difficulties, and also to the late Oba Eweka II, who very kindly attended to me for over 3 hours on March 15, 1930, for the necessary revision of this work when the original manuscript was read to him by the present Oba, then Eteaken Oselu. What he's saying basically is this: Oba Eweka II was the king. Akinzwa, who became king by 1973, Akinla went to Benin, was the one who was there to read the story to his father, Oba Eweka II. So he did not just get this thing from thin air, he got it from the traditions of the people, received traditions. Whatever you hear by Kaladera came much later. I started showing up in 1970, championed by 4 main people: S.B. Omorege, Yare, G.U. Edebiri, and Akinzwa, not the king, another man called Akinzwa. And they came up with all kinds of stories. So much so that by 1973, when Akinla went to Benin to ask them questions, while all the elders were telling the same stories as the received traditions, the younger Iogbe's were repeating what that guy had written in the newspaper. They only spice it up with Ijapa stories and say Mr. Tortoise took message from Kiniko to Kiniko, which makes absolutely no sense. All of that to say that it is true that we are connected. And by the way, the connection is not the people of the land. It's not that the people of Yoruba, it's not that Yoruba people are connected to Benin people. No. It's that Yoruba people are connected to the kings of Benin, particularly Ife, because it's from Ife that Romeo went to establish the dynasty in Benin, just as he went to here on Wednesday. We'll be here tomorrow at 4 p.m. Ife time, West African time. We're going to have a great time together. I hope you get something from this. And if you have other questions, we'll ask all those people ask questions about the connection with Owo. There's connection with Owo. There were wars with Owo. And there was a way, there were arrangements that were made between Owo people and Benin people. but I don't want us to get to that yet. I also build here. And lastly, this old revision of history is something that you notice, right? When people start getting to a particular level, they want to rewrite. We are our own men. It's okay. Thank you very much for listening. Any questions? All right, thank you very much for being here. We've been listening to History versus Revision, Understanding the Yorùbá and Benin Connection, and I hope you have enjoyed yourself. I'm going to bring one or two people up. We'll listen to their submissions, and then we'll call it a day. I think I saw a lady earlier, Oduakala, so I'm going to bring you up, and yeah, we'll talk a bit before closing today. Good evening. Good evening. Good evening. Can you hear me? Hello, Oduakala. Okay, maybe she did that mistakenly. Okay. Lagos says Oba of Oranwe is the same that went on exile by the British. Yes, but the timeline is different too. The British invasion happened in 1897. Okay, Oduakala, thank you. I thought as much, but thank you very much for even the mistake. Thank you for sending the request. All right, so I was trying to respond to Lagos. So Oba, that was 1897. That was when the British invaded Benin. Then much later you had, I think after him, 1 second. I think the next person after him was Obeweka II. Let me just check to be sure. Mambo. 1 second, please. Okay, yeah, it's Killer Quincy now. Yes, I was right. It's after Oba that we now had Eweka II. So after Eweka II, Akenzwa, and then after Akenzwa, Eredwa, and after Eredwa, you now have the present Eware II. So Ovarawente, it was one, you know the story now, the exile and everything. But after he passed on, they then installed Eweka II. Eweka II was who was there at the time that Egariva wrote his book. Okay, Akenzwa was still a prince, was a crown prince, but was not yet king, right? And at the time of Eweka, they were trying to reclaim the glory of Benin. Let me say something in passing. Well, I don't know if I should say in passing. I'll just say it, right? Whether it's in passing or it's a main thing. One of the major issues I think folks have in Benin is what happened in 1897. Much of what they've done since then has been to try to reclaim that glory. So they come up with different stuff, and it's what happens when you're trying to go back to, like when you have nostalgia for this great moments that you had, want to go back to that thing. So we are great, we are this, we are that. Because what the British did was devastating. I don't like talking about it because and I don't understand. It's more psychological than anything else. They are trying to make up for that. And interestingly, there's something to be grateful to the British about, but I'm not going to say it now. So it doesn't look as if one is saying the invasion was correct. But of course, to be honest, the invasion was actually payback. It was Benin that struck first, and then they retaliated. But when they retaliated, it was worse than what those ones did. They burnt everywhere down, got their king out, just did terrible stuff. So the point is, they've been trying to now reclaim that stuff and say, oh, we are this, we are that, but but I hope they're fine, right? Omodaro Gundari on YouTube says that is a bona fide. Okay, we've learned that as a bona fide Yoruba person, always raise your head high and be on the side of truth and history. Thank you very much. I think you're a lady, so Miss Omolara Gundari, thank you very much for that. I really do appreciate that. And it's true, we should raise our head high and be on the side of truth and honesty. It's better. You don't have to change your story too many times. Just say the truth and let the devil be ashamed. All right. So tomorrow, I want us to revisit our Biafra stuff. This time, so I've noticed something. I'm going to talk about this tomorrow. I've noticed that anytime you talk about Zikiwe, it depends on how. So if you talk about him in the context of Nigeria, the Igbos will support him. If you talk about him in the context of Igbos, the Igbos will curse him out. So I want us to try and look at what actually happened as far as Azikiwe is concerned himself. I mean, his involvement in Biafra, what was that all about? And what can we learn from that bit of our history? I think it's going to be a great time together. Hopefully, we won't have a lot of distractions, but regardless, we'll be here, we'll be ready. So 4 p.m. tomorrow, Ife time, West African time, we're going to get into some of those conversations. But before then, of course, we're going to discuss news and other things. And there's one video I want to react to. I don't know if it will be tomorrow, but there's one video there. So maybe we'll do that tomorrow. We'll see how that goes. But thank you very much for being part of today's session. I want to close early so we don't do like we did yesterday. But I hope you had a great time, and I hope you picked one thing or the other. Any questions? Let me see if there's anything on Facebook. Mr. Dewale Bajulai, I like your name. It sounds like an Ife name. Good evening, sir. Oluwaseun Pedro Luke says, Omo Benin people, I don't want to talk that one. The Ola Bubaka says, I beg Oris Makpami, Motireni, they will end up making themselves their inferiority ego. You know the thing, Benin is great. That is it. It's great. Like, there is no reason to even prop it up. The real problem, and is what is happening to Oyo too, the real problem is when you're trying to prop it up with lies. That's when even the greatness begin to whittle away. Like, people just say, you know what, let's even tell you about what makes you not great, which is not said, oh, this is what happened to them, this is why they should have been. I didn't want to do all of those things, at least not yet. To be honest, if you do, it's better for you to just understand your greatness. You may have gone through some rough patches. It happens in life. It's okay. Just move on. But when you start telling everybody you are this, you are that, you are changing everybody's story because you're trying to make up for whatever inferiority issues you have, after a while, people are going to open their mouth and begin to correct you. And hopefully you take to correction. If not, then and I hope we learn the lessons very early. Thank you very much for those comments on Facebook and on YouTube. For those of us on TikTok, okay, I think I read your comments earlier as well. Thank you very much for being here. So we'll be here tomorrow, 4 p.m. Ife time, West African time. I'll be discussing, I'll take the title tomorrow. It's about Zik and Ojukwu. Why did he leave? Was it part of it? And I'm doing this because of a question that somebody asked on YouTube. So I put out a video, and it was a request I saw earlier today. I'll probably just read it out so that it gives us an idea of what's going to be like. Essentially, the person was asking Shah that, okay, can you enlighten us? Okay, hey Busui, can you enlighten us in a separate clip if Azikiwe was really officially on the side of Nigeria or on the side of Biafra? There's nothing in history that shows he went to jail supporting Biafra, so he must be on the side of the federal government. Or where was he during the war? I gave a simple response, but I think we're gonna have a session on that, stuff, just to understand, But thanks to Ekundaya who sent the message on YouTube. So let's see what happens tomorrow. We will have a session on that topic. Thank you everyone for being part of today's session. I want to thank all the people who have power tapped and liked the live on YouTube, on Facebook, on TikTok. Thank you very much for your support. Thanks for the gifts, and thanks for your generosity. May God bless you. Okay, before we go, we're going to listen to our anthems. We do the Nigerian anthem and then the Yoruba anthem. And if you know the songs, please sing along. By the way, let me give you one original. Biafra has an anthem. But did you know that the anthem was composed by Zik? We'll talk about it tomorrow. Here's Nigerian national anthem. Take a listen.
Nigeria, we are on dear native land, though tribe and tongue may differ, in brotherhood we stand. Nigerians all are proud to serve our sovereign motherland. Our flag shall be a symbol that truth and justice reign, in peace or battle honored, and this we count as gain. To hand unto our children a banner without stain. O God of all creation, grant this our one request. Help us to build a nation that is oppressed, and so with peace and plenty, Nigeria may be blessed. Nigeria may be
Àwa ni ìmọ́lẹ̀ ogun adúláwọ̀, ìmọ́lẹ̀ wọ̀ ni wọ́kùn lẹ́ Yorùbá lágbára Ọlọ́run. Lẹ́ Yorùbá ò ní bàjẹ́, Nàìjíríà náà ò ní dàrú lágbára Ọlọ́run. I just saw a comment on YouTube. It was begging, I think it was, okay, it's White Ikobo. It says it was begging that Oba Benin used to pacify Ogedengbe, who invaded. Let's not go to that bazooka level. You are right, though. Yeah, it's not. You are 100% correct. But if you're lost side, but we'll see how this whole thing goes. If you ever get to that point, we'll probably just talk about it. We won't hold back. That's what I meant to say. But thank you very much for that. So thanks everybody for being part of today's session. I'll see you tomorrow, 4 p.m. Ife time, West African time. May God bless you. May God keep you. May everything you lay your hands on prosper. Thanks for being part of today's session. I'll see you tomorrow. Odaro. Thank you.